The following story is also available as a read-only version. Check the link in the description if you're interested. When people ask, "What do you do?" I tell them I'm a psychiatrist. It's the truth, technically. I'm a trained medical professional. I have a practice where I do therapy with patients, and it says so on my tax return. At least half of those very same people will then look at me like they're a comedian and say, "You probably meet a lot of very interesting people." Then they chuckle, and I chuckle, and inform them that, "Oh, you have no idea." And they don't. If I described any of my patients to them in detail, they would declare me insane. That's a good thing, I think. A psychiatrist should have a certain distance to their patients, and there is no distance greater than living in two different worlds. Not literally, of course, but a world in terms of what a person experiences on the daily. The metaphorical world. You know what I mean. One of my patients is called Thomas Parnham III. Officially, his grandfather came to America on board the Titanic, or at least he stepped off one of the vessels that rescued the passengers. He was the original Thomas Parnham, even though he was called Parnham Franklin. One should not take too close a look at any photographs of the original Thomas Parnham Franklin, at least if one wishes to avoid being struck by a certain striking similarities between grandfather and grandson. Aside from the mustache and the fact that one of them is in color, the two look almost exactly the same. They even seem to be of the same age. Things get even weirder when one scours the Titanic passenger records to find that Thomas Parnham Franklin, who lodged in first-class cabin D-34, had died when the ship sank, and his body had never been recovered. But that needn't concern me. What does concern me are my patient's issues. He is a good man at heart, a fact which manifests in his desire not to kill people anymore. He's been working on it for quite some time, he tells me, and while many of his friends haven't killed anyone in 50 years, he still does it from time to time. For complicated legal reasons, he is allowed to kill 2 people every year, provided certain conditions are met and they're not persons of public interest. If he killed someone who was on TV, he'd go to prison. Not for murder, mind you. As I said, it's a different world. Thomas Parnham III is a wealthy man, with the means of getting all the sustenance he needs without ever killing anyone. He employs 3 beautiful young women who are handsomely paid for presenting their wrists and necks whenever their master needs to feed. He can afford the highest quality of donor blood and purchase even the most expensive supplements for his unusual diet. This year has been particularly good. He hasn't killed anyone yet, even though he sometimes feels an overwhelming urge to do so. He likes to talk about how he feels ostracized from his friends for being unable to overcome his predatory nature. In his opinion, they kill just as often as he does, but pretend they don't simply because not killing people is fashionable right now. Personally, I don't know if that's just a paranoid delusion, but I'm glad he's making progress. One of my other patients goes by the name Faisal Al-Jabiri, and he's exactly the type of person who wouldn't see a psychiatrist because of the attached stigma in his particular cultural circle. It took a lot of convincing from his wife to have him come to my office, but I'm glad he did, because he needs it. He's the patriarch of one of those Middle Eastern clans. Though they're a very large family, they're also a tight-knit community where everyone is involved in everyone else's business, and a lot of that business isn't exactly kosher. Faisal has an anger problem. Most people in his circle would simply describe him as very passionate, and from what he tells me, being very passionate isn't exactly rare in his family. It's just that he is on a whole different level. When he gets mad, he gets mad. There is always the risk that his rage will turn into a tantrum, and when it does, things can become very dangerous. I have since figured out that you can see an impending tantrum in his eyes, which will gradually fill with fire until they are entirely ablaze. I mean that literally, by the way. His eyes catch fire, and when he starts breaking things, his body follows suit. I've become a bit of a lion tamer by necessity in order to deal with Faisal, and so far I only had to use the fire extinguisher I keep on standby twice. My favorite patient is also the one I've had longest. Even though she's a Native American woman, she introduced herself to me as Jane, claiming I wouldn't even be able to understand her real name, much less replicate it. She was referred to me by one of my mentors early on in my career, just before he went into retirement, and she'd been a long-term patient of his ever since he first opened his practice in 1953. Judging from the pictures, she'd been in her mid-40s back then. Today, almost 70 years later, she looks to be in her late 60s. Part of her therapy is a desire for accepting death, but I think she mostly likes to have someone to talk to. From how she describes herself, she is not a very agreeable person outside the practice, which I find odd considering she has been nothing but a sweet old lady with me. She displays no other symptoms of schizophrenia or any other personality syndrome, and part of the reason for her grating behavior seems to be her lack of community over here on the East Coast. I have suggested multiple times that she move back to her home in the state of Washington, but she says she can never return and doesn't explain why. Even after 20 years, I'm still not sure if her behavior is natural or if she has some type of disorder I've never heard of. She's a passionate huntress, has a fear of airplanes and helicopters, eats most of her food raw, and can turn her neck by 360 degrees. Oh, and she only goes out at night. Her therapy is the only regular appointment she has during the day, and she has long insisted to keep it that way, even when I offered late sessions. As you can see, I am in fact a psychiatrist. My patients may be unorthodox, or at least more so than those of my colleagues, but they are patients, and they require my help. I love my job. It's dangerous sometimes, sure, and I get visited by men in black suits, hats, and sunglasses every quarter, but I still wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. It pays well, and it gives me a look behind the curtain, without having to live there. If I had to choose this profession again, I would do so in a heartbeat. If you liked this story and would like to hear more, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. A new short story is uploaded every Wednesday, and there will occasionally be another one in between if I find the time. Thank you very much for listening and have a great day.